Hello and welcome to this very special virtual event. Recently, a team of researchers led by Professor Maria Paola Scaparra from the University of Kent have used analytics tools to analyse the impacts of flooding on urban road networks in Vietnam. The hope is that the team will help to identify cost-efficient ways to mitigate flood damage in the country and in doing so minimise the social and economic impacts such natural disasters can cause. We're going to be discussing the research, its impacts and looking to the future of the project's applications among many other topics today with Professor Scaparra, along with Dan Tu Phuong and No Jong Chin, who have both worked on the project. And we want to get you involved at home, so please feel free to send through any questions or comments you have via the live chat sidebars on your Facebook or YouTube streams. I'll put those through to our panellists to answer over the course of our discussion. But first, I've been finding out a little more about this vital and fascinating research.
Vietnam, a land rich with history and culture, it's also one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. Yet the annual monsoon season has wreaked havoc for the Southeast Asian nation, challenging its development and devastating its people. In the last 50 years, more than 5,000 Vietnamese have lost their lives and 25 million have suffered displacement and disruption, making the country the fourth most impacted by flooding in the entire world. Mass urbanisation, ageing drainage systems and climate change have all exacerbated the problem, especially on the country's deteriorating road network. So how to tackle this problem? Working with local authorities, researchers and communities, a team from the Kent Business School has taken a science-driven approach to planning. Using analytical tools, including simulations, the team are researching the impacts of flooding on road networks in Vietnam's cities, identifying cost-efficient investments which will lessen the social and economic damage. This pioneering research will now be investigated in 5 other Southeast Asian countries and has the potential to change the lives of millions in the region, and all through the wonderful world of analytics. Now, I'm thrilled to say Professor Scaparra, Dan Tu Phuong and No Jong Chin from the project join me live now. Remember, if you have any questions for our panel, do send them through via the live comments sidebar on Facebook and YouTube. We'll put those to our panellists over the course of this event. Paola, let's come to you first. Tell us a little bit about your journey from academia to taking on these real-world problems.
Yeah, my journey started about, I would say, almost 2 decades ago when I moved to the University of California in Santa Barbara as a postdoctoral researcher. And back then, my postdoc was funded by the US Department for Transportation and was focusing on developing analytics techniques for the protection of critical infrastructure. Now, the reason for that was that it was just after the September 11 attacks in the US. So there were a lot of funding allocated for homeland security. So I started developing new tools and I deviated a little bit for what was my research for my PhD. And I started setting the groundwork for this new line of research. So I was looking back then mainly at man-made disasters and terrorist attacks and how to invest wisely to protect critical infrastructures. But later on, I quite shifted a little bit the focus of my research and I wanted to broaden it up so as to include also the natural disasters. At the same time, I would say about 2015, it was a landmark years in terms of the development and adoption of some of the most important policy framework with the Paris Agreement, with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and obviously with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So all this policy framework really attracted my attention, and I decided that I wanted to do something more practical. So up to then, my research had been pretty theoretical, but I would say confined a little bit within the walls of the academic community. But I was very keen to do something that was more applicable, that was really impactful and could have an impact on societies and communities. So in 2015, 2016 was also the year where the UK government launched the Global Challenges Research Fund. So I saw there really a great opportunity for me to apply for research funds and to start working on real applications, especially in developing countries. At the same time, I've been a friend with Fong for several years, purely because our children went to school together. And I knew that she was also working on climate change and disaster risk reduction. So Fong had really decades of experience in international development. She had a solid network of stakeholder collaborators in Vietnam, but also in other Southeast Asian countries. And although we came from two very different backgrounds, because Fong was an expert more in policy, adaptation policy and advocacy, and I was a mathematician, an analytics kind of person, I think we had a shared interest in climate change and in disaster management. So we started talking about possible projects, and then we applied for funding together. And since then, really, my research has mainly focused on the real applications. So not only in Vietnam and developing countries, but here in the UK as well. So I work, for example, with companies such as Eurostar and Port of Dover, and lately also with the NHS. So a great focus on practical applications, because I think that research that really doesn't lead to impact on society and community is not as worthwhile and rewarding as the research that can help addressing some of the big global challenges.
And that's such an important message, and one that we're really gonna dwell on in this discussion. It's a real fascinating journey, as you said, from looking at terrorism to natural disasters, and going into that field of policy framework, which is a perfect point to bring in Fong as well. Fong, why don't you? We heard a little bit of an intro there from Paola about your connection with both of you. Tell us a little bit yourself about your background in supporting research and development programs across the Southeast Asia region.
Thank you so much for the opportunity today for us to discuss the result of our research. First of all, let me say very sincere thanks to Paola, who has been amazing researcher in the UK, who are very committed to research in developing country, and also very committed in equal partnership with the Vietnamese scientists and Vietnamese government officers and staff in this research. It's not only in words, but she's very committed in equal, sharing of tasks and responsibilities, and also the budget for the Vietnamese team. So I'm really grateful for that. So back briefly about myself, I have been very fortunate to work in development and poverty reduction in Vietnam as a practitioner at the grassroots level, and also as researcher over 20 years. Since 2008, I have been the member of the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, Climate Change Working Group, where in Vietnam, which is very active networks, where all the NGO staff, UN, United Nations offices, government agency, academic, private sector, normally meet and discuss all the challenges of the disasters and climate change in the country. So through these networks, I have a lot of understanding of the the key stakeholders in the country dealing with disaster risk reduction and climate change. Also, since 2012, I started working as an international consultant for Food and Agriculture Organization, and even Overseas Development Institute in the UK, for evaluating some emergency projects in Vietnam, Myanmar, and the Philippines after all the disaster happened. So through this work experience, I also understand the impact of the disaster on the local people, and talking with different stakeholders, including donors, NGO, the people who work actively in this field, in this country, which also gave me some insights and helpful for our research development later on. I also have to mention my work for Oxfam and Care International and Challenge to Change in the UK, in Vietnam, where I can work on policy advocacy on climate finance. So we have to do the research on climate finance globally and also for Vietnam. So from then on, I know quite a lot of climate finance issues that we need to deal with for the most vulnerable people in the country. So, with my background as a practitioner in Vietnam, I have been using different tools, participatory capacity and vulnerability assessment tool, gender mainstreaming in different initiatives, and also with the policy advocacy. I have been engaging actively at national level and also at international level. So, with those insights, and then this is also helpful for our research development with my colleague here. So since 2017, I was appointed as the honorary research fellow, research associate for Kent Business School, thanks to the support of Paola, and working closely with Paola and her team in the school to develop this research. And it's my privilege to be part of the research.
And one of the really key aspects of the research that you identified is working with those local organisations, groups and individuals. Chin, you're obviously based out in Vietnam. Chin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your organisation, AMDI, and the area of work that you work in?
Good morning, UK. It is evening time for Vietnam, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk with all of you about our institute, the Asian Management and Development Institute. In short, we call AMD. It's a Vietnamese non-governmental research and consultancy organization. And I'm a technical director of the institute and also directly manage the research center for disaster risk reduction and climate change. That's my interest and hobbies for the last 20 years. My institute, we established in 2006 with the aim to provide professional and reliable services to the society, to the government agencies, to the donors and academia. And we based in Hanoi, the capital city of Vietnam, a lovely city. And we work in country, and we also work in the South Asian region. In this research, AMD is a partner with School of Business, Kent University, to conduct the study funded by British Academy. That's Professor Paola already mentioned, and Mrs. Phương is one of our partners in this research. And we work together since 2018 up to now, and we are now friends in our life and also partners in our work. So we are very pleased to be part of this research network. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real success story of all these different groups coming together to work for a shared goal in what is a really vital issue and something that really impacts everybody in Vietnam and throughout the region. Paola, how did you identify the impact of flooding on transport infrastructure as an issue that needed tackling? How did that issue come up and arise?
This was actually the outcome of a workshop that we ran. So Phong has already mentioned that she was appointed as an honorary research associate here at the University of Kent. And together we applied for some internal funding from the Faculty of Social Sciences to run scoping workshops in Vietnam. And the reason for this is that we really wanted to make sure that we were addressing problems of relevance and we are addressing the real needs of the local community in Vietnam. So we used this fund to run workshops in both Vietnam and in Myanmar. And this was really, really key because, in fact, we had to slightly change our research direction. Obviously, the research had to be aligned with my expertise in disaster management, but our initial thought was really to develop new models for response to disasters. So to include models for evacuation and the relief of item and emergency supplies. But then during the workshops, and thanks to the connections that Phong had with several stakeholders at national and city level, we really realized that actually in Vietnam, especially in urban cities, the major focus was not on the response, just because they've already developed their experience in responding quite efficiently to the disasters. But the main focus and the interest of urban planners and policymakers was in mitigating the impact of floods in the first place. So it was really important that we had these workshops and we followed this bottom-up approach where our research was informed by the real needs. So really, this was pretty much the outcome of the workshop that made us realize that that was the real need for Vietnam at that moment in time.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the issues around flooding in just a sec. But just a reminder to all of you watching at home on Facebook or YouTube, you can of course send in your questions and we'll put those to the panel. I can see we've got one viewer who's watching in Nepal. We've got some viewers in the UK watching. So we've got viewers all around the world. So if you've got any questions or comments for our panel, you can send those in over the course of the event. Chin, I wanted to ask you a question about flooding and the impact that it has in Vietnam. What are some of the, paint us a bit of a picture about the social and the economic impacts that natural disasters like flooding have on the country and its people?
Well, Vietnam is, you know, that is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. This according to the World Bank and also to ADB and the UN agency. And the riverine and the coastal flooding represent one of the major natural risks faced by the countries. And this is due to the extended coastal area, the river basins, and the lakeshore that Vietnam has. And annually, Vietnam, we suffer from 8 to 12 tropical typhoons, and of course, many floods and flash floods in the mountain area. According to the government of Vietnam statistics, the annual loss caused by all disaster, natural disaster, and most of them are flooding, is account for 1 to 1.5% of the country's GDP. In a single year of 2020, the total loss was 346 people dead and cost about 1.5 billion US dollars. So that you can understand that how serious Vietnam toward the natural disaster and flood. And that also affect a lot of the people living both in the city and in the rural area. Back to you.
Chin as well, we saw in some of that footage that played, we could see some of the roads that were completely flooded because of the monsoon season. What exacerbates transport problems because of flooding? Does it cut off areas from getting aid? It obviously stops people from going to work? What are some of the problems that arise from the transport structure being flooded?
Well, there's the annual torrential rains cause many city floods, especially Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City of Vietnam, the most important, the biggest city. And every year, this is the monsoon season. And this is affect a lot of transportation system, like a traffic jam. Sometimes from my home to my work, my office is about 5 kilometers. It can take me 1 or even 2 hours, in the traffic. And of course, for the people living along the streets as a street vendor, they lost their livelihood because of the flood and because of the traffic congestion. And during the city flood, it is the poor household who are the most vulnerable to all impacts of the flood. The children can be absent from the school. The sick people maybe cannot access to the healthcare facility timely, and many more. We can name it. I can provide one example in 2008 in Hanoi. It is a historic city flood in 100 years. And that's almost whole city is flooded. And in some area, some quarters of Hanoi, the flood's water lasts for a few weeks, and the total loss for that flood is almost 200 million US dollars.
It's incredible sums, really. I mean, Phong, as Chin was saying earlier on as well, 1.5% of the GDP being impacted, and some of those other figures being a huge amount. And the impact on livelihoods as well. What does that mean for the rest of the region? Because obviously there's other countries in Southeast Asia that are also prone to these problems. What impact does this have on them?
Yes, so as you know, according to the World Disaster Report of International Red Cross Organization, International Federation of Red Cross 2020, Asia, including Southeast Asian country, is the most vulnerable region in terms of disasters. And so flooding and tropical cyclones, storm, typhoons, which also cause a lot of floodings, is very prominent in this area. For example, in 2019, this is the highest number of floods in Asia across different countries. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, Asia would also have up to nearly 80 million people affected by disaster and climate change. So similar to Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, the Philippines, Indonesia are all very badly affected in recent years. Now, when we talk about flood and typhoon and storm in Southeast Asia, which have caused a lot of damages, we also categorize the impacts into three different kinds: social, environmental, and economic impacts. But I have to emphasize that a lot of economic impacts are easier to quantify, but the social and the environmental impacts are very, very hard to quantify, but sometimes are much more significant than the economic losses. And the most important point when we talk about the impacts is also many of the impacts are gender and income differentiated. That means women, men, children, boys, girls, elderly people suffer from floods and flood impact differently. The poorer household, the female-headed households, suffer from them also very differently because of their less weather-dependent jobs, very less secure housing, poorer incomes, and living in very risky areas. So the difference is also attributed to a lot of social obligations and social expectation from the society for women, differently from men, for income level, for capacity, for exposure, and their decision-making power within their household. So in terms of for example, I can talk about the social impacts. For example, of floods, such as injuries and death. We found in different studies across Asia that women and girls are more prone to be drowned due to their limited capacity of swimming compared to boys and men. That's for example. And in terms of flooding consequences, we also lead to a lot of infectious disease, waterborne disease. And when they have a disease in the community or at the household level, in general in Asia, it's the women who look after the sick, who worry about the medicine, who treat the children and the elderly in the family. So again, all these health consequences add even more work burden on the women, particularly on the unpaid domestic work that they have. And this very, very similar in different countries that I have been to in Asia. Another impact in terms of economic impacts, people say normally you see a big picture, a big number by the government, but in fact there are a lot of impact at the household level that are very hard to quantify. For example, the most important one is the loss of jobs. Many of the poorer households in this country work in a very informal job sector, earning daily wage. So meaning that if the flooding happens, then they will lose their income, reduce their income, or lose their income completely, and this will make it much harder for their lives during the flood time and or after the flood period as well. So a second one in terms of economic impacts at the household level is the displacement of housing. Many of the community even lose their homes. It happened a lot even in Vietnam, in Myanmar. They lose their home due to the river flooding and coastal flooding, for example, or their houses are badly damaged. And for many of the poor households, damaged houses or losing their home is the most costly factor in their lives. So there are lots of money needed to recover. And the flood, it happened every year in many countries. In Vietnam, we happen every year. It's not only the big flood, as we mentioned earlier. Then that means that they have to have money to spend on their housing all the time. The next one in terms of economic impacts for people in Asia is also the infrastructure loss. So it's investment by the public money and by the governments, and the roads, bridges, school, healthcare center can also be damaged during this time. So this is also the very heavy cost for the government budget themselves. And in terms of environmental costs, we have, as we know, in Southeast Asia, we still have many communities who live in an area where they don't have even a clean water supply. So when the flood happened, it contaminate the water, contaminate a lot of water resources, and so basically it's caused other secondary impacts on people's lives, such as more, health issues and disease and things like that. So the contaminated water supply at the household level is very important one to highlight. Of course, we also have environmental impacts at the natural resources level. For example, the ecosystem of the river bank, silting of the rivers, all those ecosystem changes also affected because, for example, in Asia we have many mangroves protecting the sea dikes, the sea coastal area, and if the flooding happen and damage all these plants, then it's also affect the capacity to deal with the flood. When we talk about the flood impacts, we also need to look into the causes of floods. And normally we work with the community to understand the causes of floods. And the causes can be man-made, and can also be higher rainfalls during the stormy season. So we have to address the man-made and as well, because that's the most critical one that we can deal with at the local level or at the national level.
I think you've really been able to paint a picture of those various issues faced with people throughout the region. We've had, off the back of that, we've had Shanta on Facebook has sent in a message. She's from India. She says they also experience similar things with the cyclones that they face every year. They've learned to cope and survive with it, but they, I imagine, will will have to tackle a lot of those issues that you brought up there, Phong. I want to dive into some more about the nitty-gritty regarding the optimization and the technology and really dig into the analytics now a little bit. And we've got a question in from Francesca. She's asked a question for Paola. Can you tell us a bit about the methodology you used for the scoping workshops?
In terms of the scoping workshops, we used software techniques and participatory approaches, but this was not really part of the main project and of the optimization. In terms of building our models, as I mentioned before, we wanted to use a bottom-up approach. And to do that, we ran some surveys in the cities. So we interviewed we ran some surveys with more than 500 participants. And we did that for two different reasons. Number one, because we wanted to identify what were the main perceived causes of flood at the community level. And then we wanted to see what were the main perceived impacts of the flood on the local communities. So we really wanted our mathematical and analytical models to be informed by the responses of the communities. So what came out from these surveys and assessment exercise that we ran with households but also with visitors and street vendors in the central districts of Hanoi was that they consider the main cause of flood the obsolete state of their drainage system, And then the major impacts that they perceived were actually on the road network in terms of congestion and in terms of damage. And this was quite surprising because they put the public tools in front of their own households. So following from this assessment, then we decided, this informed really what were the objectives of our optimization models. And we decided to focus on congestion. So congestion is a huge problem within Hanoi, even in the normal circumstances. But when there are floods, the problem is further exacerbated. And the second was the damage to the transport infrastructure. So this was the first little building block of our optimization model that allowed to define the main objectives. So reduction of damage and reduction of congestion. Then the model was obviously involving many different teams. It was a requirement of the funder, the British Academy, that we had like an interdisciplinary teams. So we really work in conjunction also with hydrologists and the meteorologists who gave us waterfall predictions in different scenarios, and they build the flood maps for us, for the city of Hanoi. So all this was captured within our optimization model that was like a monster, massive number of equations and the mathematical expression just to capture all these synergies and the interconnected components. But so it was a mix really of the results of the workshops and of the more qualitative research, and then the application of the more technical mathematical tools.
Well, brilliant. Francesca, thank you very much for sending that question in. And now talking about the modelling and the optimisation, I think it's a really good time to bring in one of our pre-recorded testimonials that we've had ready for this event. We're going to hear from Dr. Trung Hugh Tran now. He's also played a key role in the project, as well as being a leading author in data analytics. He's talked a little bit about the optimisation and the modelling. Here is what he's had to say.
I'm expert in operational research and management science. My research interests are development and application of optimization models and techniques for solving global challenges, especially in the development of meta-heuristic algorithms for large-scale optimization problems. Over the past 2 years, I'm hold co-investigator role in the GCRF OSIRIS project titled Optimal Investment Strategies to Minimize Flood Impact on Road Infrastructure System in Vietnam, funded by British Academy's Global Challenges Research Fund, Cities and Infrastructure Program. In this project, I supported Professor Paola in project management and supervised the PDRA to formulate the mathematical model and design the meta-heuristic algorithm for finding the optimal investment strategies to mitigate the flood impact on road infrastructure system in terms of the damage and congestions under climate change scenarios. In addition, I designed a graphical user interface to help the central planners to utilize the mathematical model and meta-heuristic algorithm developed under this project. It enables central planners to identify and visualize the optimal investment strategies under budget constraints to minimize flood impact on road infrastructure system under different climate change scenarios. In the graphical user interface, the planners can easily see damage and congestion reduction on catchments and roads after selected projects are implemented by changing colors at the catchments and the roads. For example, looking at the catchment form in the graphical user interface, they can see the visualization of base case before any mitigation projects implemented on the left-hand side, and the visualization of our solution suggested by the meta-heuristic algorithm on the right-hand side. In the right-hand side map, TP represents type, period, and project implemented in specified catchment. For the different damage levels of flood on the catchments, we define red, orange, and yellow to represent high, medium, and low damage levels, respectively. Users can easily see when Project 14 is implemented at the time period 0, the project 17 implemented at time period 3, and project 8 is implemented at time period 8. The corresponding red height damage catchments where the project is implemented in our case study are changed into the orange medium damage catchments. Similarly, we define dark blue, blue, and light blue to represent high, medium, and low congestion levels, respectively, for different congestion levels of road network. When users look at a road form in the graphical user interface, again, they can see the visualization of base case on the left-hand side and the visualization of our solution on the right-hand side. Compared to maps, we can see that in Tây Hồ district in Vietnam's Hanoi capital, the dark blue high congestion roads are changed into the light blue low congestion roads. There are several congestion reduction on road network at other districts such as Cầu Giấy or Pa Đình. In summary, we designed the graphical interface to have a central planners use our model and algorithm without prior knowledge of the mathematical programming and optimization methods to find the optimal investment strategies for minimization of flood impacts on road infrastructure systems and visualize the solutions found.
Dr. Chung Hyu Tran there, thank you very much for sending that in. Chen, let's come to you. Just really, what has been the, tell us what have been some of the results of Paola's research?
Well, I think that this is the most important thing that Dr. Chung Hyu Tran already mentioned is that in this research, we produce all the scenario of the floods, and that's what we use for planning of the transportation system and networks. And the different results is also the flood maps. That's very important. That's for the decision makers to identify the area in the city which with the high level of water in different flood scenarios in order to target the intervention by the city authorities in their planning for investment in the future. So we hope with these tools, with the result produced by the research, the Institute for Transportation Development and Strategy, they will advocate for the ministry and the city authority to use the scenario, the flood maps for their planning. Thank you.
And also, Paola, as we were focusing on a little bit earlier on, there have been stakeholders and organisations from a range of disciplines. What have been some of the main challenges of working with that working with what's a very interdisciplinary project?
I would say that the main challenge was probably communicating across researchers with a very, very different background. So, for example, when we had to build our mathematical models, we had to incorporate the results of that were given to us from the hydrologists. We built the rainfall scenarios and also the maps, the flood maps for the city of Hanoi. Now, as mathematical modelers, we speak our own language. We know how to model by representing the objective and the constraints of a problem, but we didn't quite know how to incorporate these flood maps into the mathematical model. But then by exchanging a lot of calls and emails with the hydrologist team, then we look at the underlying data. And the underlying data was basically a massive Excel file where for each catchment in the city of Hanoi, we could see what was the percentage of the catchment area that was flooded at a given water level. So at that point, it was much easier, having knowledge of the data, to incorporate this into our mathematical model. And then probably the second challenge was to collect and to integrate all the data in a very different forms. So as I said, we had data related to the flood maps of the city, but we had the data collected by our transport economists. So they provided data, for example, about the water, the speed of the vehicles in the city, depending on the depth of the water. So massive amount of data that we needed to integrate, put in the right format to then feed them into our mathematical optimization model. So I would say that the communication when you work across disciplinary boundary, it was probably the major challenge together with the problem of getting data.
Yeah, absolutely. And also having so many individuals involved. Chin, why has it been so vital to involve stakeholders from not just in the region, but internationally as well, NGOs, World Bank, USAID? Why has that been important? And also, what's been the response from the Vietnamese government throughout all of this?
Well, you know that infrastructure improvement is always requires very large funding, and it's not easy to attract the investor to invest. So that's the reason why we need to involve from the donors, with the donors from the beginning of any projects or research. And I think that using the research finding, in this case, the city governors, the planners from the Institute of Transportation Development and Research, they can present the idea to get more funding from the donors and to apply for the future planning of the city transportation network. And of course, the application of mathematical models can be used to support the proposal to apply for large investment funds for the future investment of my city, Hanoi City, because we are expanding. We now in needs of a much better transportation network, the sewage system, so that the people will benefit from free movement of during their life. And the second point is about what Vietnamese government response so far. We after the research completed and the result has been shared with all the government agency, the academia, the other NGOs in Vietnam. We already received the interest from the Transportation Development and Strategy Institute that they would like to extend this kind of research to explore in the other part of Vietnam, specifically in the Mekong Delta. And this is a very important area for the countries because the Mekong Delta is a house for about 20 million people. And the area plays a very important role for the food security of the whole countries and also the world, because Vietnam is now a rice export #1 in the world. And in 2020 exported 6.2 million tons of rice, and we earned back about $3 billion of US dollars. So that's a very important, very good side of the interest of the government for this research findings. And of course, as Phương already mentioned earlier, the Mekong Delta is also under the very high risk of the flooding due to the climate change, and with the high scenario of emission, we can lose 2/3 of the Mekong Delta due to the climate change impact.
You're talking about the Mekong Delta. I think that's a perfect time to bring in a couple of other stakeholders we've been talking to based out in Vietnam. So to talk about the application, development and benefits of the project in the Mekong Delta region. Here's Dr. Pham Hoài Trung from the Transport Development and Strategy Institute and Nguyen Duc Chin from the Vietnam Government Ministry of Water and the Environment.
Tôi xin giới thiệu, tôi là Phùng Đức Chính. Hiện tại tôi đang là nghiên cứu viên của Viện Khoa học Khí tượng Thủy văn và Biến đổi khí hậu. Và trong cái dự án hợp tác với Đại học Ken về cái đánh giá cái tác động của cái ngập lụt trên cái với giao thông của Việt Nam, thì chúng tôi có tham gia cái dự án này, và cái nội dung công việc chúng tôi là xây dựng cái bản đồ ngập lụt cho 8 quận nội thành của Hà Nội. Và cái kết quả của dự án là chúng tôi là thấy là hữu ích và rất là khả quan. Và nội dung của công việc chúng tôi tham gia là thứ nhất là xây dựng các cái bản đồ ngập lụt để mô phỏng cái ngập lụt cho khu vực Hà Nội, trong đó xác định được cái diện tích và cái độ sâu ngập lụt của cái 8 quận này. Và cái dự án đã đem lại chúng tôi một cái kết quả, đó là thứ nhất là nâng cao được năng lực của cán bộ chúng tôi, đồng thời là cái kết quả cũng từ cái kết quả mà chúng tôi nghiên cứu, chúng tôi xác định được các khu vực ngập lụt cũng như là diện tích và độ sâu ngập lụt, từ đó chỉ ra rằng cái khu vực nào bị ngập lụt nhất và khu nào bị ngập ít hơn, để thành phố có những cái giải pháp xử lý. Đồng thời chúng tôi cũng lồng ghép các cái kịch bản biến đổi khí hậu vào trong cái kịch bản này. Chúng tôi tính toán cái khả năng ngập lụt trong cái kịch bản biến đổi khí hậu trong giai đoạn 2030 đến 2050 đó, và để chỉ ra rằng cái khu vực nào mà bị ngập lụt ảnh hưởng nhất do biến đổi khí hậu gây ra. Đồng thời chúng tôi cũng đã tính toán cái hiệu quả của các cái dự án cấp thoát nước. Với mỗi cái dự án cấp thoát nước, chúng tôi khi đưa vào chúng tôi mô phỏng cái tính khả thi của dự án để xác định rằng dự án có khả thi không, dự án nào khả thi, dự án nào không khả thi, từ đó giúp cho cái cơ quan quản lý mà lựa chọn được các cái dự án hiệu quả để thực hiện cái giải toán cấp thoát nước cho Hà Nội. Đồng thời dự án cũng tăng cường được cái sự hợp tác giữa các cơ quan, trong đó có Viện Khí tượng Thủy văn, rồi các bộ giao thông, của các cơ quan khác, các trường đại học khác trong nước. Ngoài ra thì cái nghiên cứu của chúng tôi cũng đã tạo điều kiện để tăng cường cái hợp tác quan hệ giữa IMHEN với Đại học Kent. Và ngoài ra thì chúng tôi kiến nghị là sau khi bởi vì cái hiệu quả của dự án là rất là tốt, vậy chúng tôi là mong muốn rằng sau khi mà cái dự án này hoàn thành, chúng tôi mong rằng Đại học Kent sẽ có tiếp tục có những nghiên cứu tiếp theo cho các cái thành phố khác, đặc biệt những cái khu vực mà bị chịu tổn thương nhất như là vùng đồng bằng sông Cửu Long.
Rất vui khi được trả lời cái buổi phỏng vấn ngày hôm nay. Tôi xin tự giới thiệu, tôi là Phạm Hoài Trung, Phó Viện trưởng Viện Chiến lược Phát triển Giao thông Vận tải của Bộ Giao thông Vận tải Việt Nam. Tôi xin giới thiệu về cái vai trò của tôi trong dự án mà Đại học Kent Business School cùng với các đồng nghiệp Anh tham gia để nghiên cứu trên địa bàn Việt Nam. Với vai trò của tôi có 3 cái vai trò chính, đó là một là cung cấp các cái dữ liệu cho cái hệ thống giao thông khu vực ngập lụt tại thủ đô Hà Nội. Thứ hai là tôi tham gia vào nhóm chuyên gia phối hợp giữa Anh và Việt Nam để có thể phân tích, đánh giá về tình trạng ngập lụt đô thị và các vấn đề trong về phân tích hiệu quả kinh tế khi mà bị tác động bởi ngập lụt. Việc thứ ba của tôi trong dự án đó là chúng tôi có thể là khuyến nghị và đề ra các cái việc mà yếu tố chính sách mà Việt Nam đang thực hiện, và để xin ý kiến hoặc tham vấn cùng với các bạn Anh để đưa ra các cái đề xuất khuyến nghị trong việc là điều chỉnh, sửa đổi các chính sách cho phù hợp với điều kiện phát triển của Việt Nam. Về lợi ích và vai trò của dự án thì tôi thấy khi dự án đã được triển khai ở Việt Nam, đây là một cái dự án rất là có ý nghĩa về mặt khoa học cũng như về mặt thực tiễn. Thì có 5 cái nội dung mà tôi ghi nhận được ở dự án này. Thứ nhất là việc đào tạo và chuyển giao cái trình độ quản lý thông qua tập huấn và hội thảo tại Việt Nam 2 buổi, thì đây là một cái cơ hội rất lớn cho cán bộ của các cơ quan thuộc thành phố Hà Nội được tiếp cận với cái mô hình mới cũng như là cái cách làm việc mới. Vấn đề thứ hai là khả năng áp dụng cho cái đô thị Hà Nội rất tốt để phân tích được cái hiệu quả tác động do ngập lụt. Từ đó thì các nhà quản lý sẽ nhìn thấy để đưa ra được các giải pháp khắc phục kịp thời. Thứ ba nữa là cái mô hình OA là một mô hình chúng tôi cho rằng là rất hữu ích không phải chỉ triển khai cho dự án này mà có thể mở rộng ra cho các dự án khác. Cái thứ tư nữa là chúng tôi cũng muốn là cái mô hình này chúng tôi đang từng bước, Viện Chiến lược cũng đề xuất để có thể áp dụng cho một số mô hình tại các đô thị khác và đồng bằng sông Cửu Long. Đấy. Còn vấn đề thứ năm là mô hình này chúng tôi thấy rằng có thể phù hợp rất tốt cho việc ứng dụng tại vùng đồng bằng sông Cửu Long, nơi mà Viện Chiến lược cũng đang có các cái nghiên cứu về giao thông, quy hoạch giao thông đấy trên địa bàn. Viện Chiến lược thì là một cái cơ quan tham mưu đầu ngành của Bộ Giao thông Vận tải, nên chúng tôi thấy rằng cái dự án này có rất nhiều cái ý nghĩa và đóng góp lớn. Đây chúng tôi sẽ muốn là cái cơ hội này để cọ sát với các chuyên gia của anh để giải quyết cái vấn đề này, tham mưu cho các địa phương. Ngoài ra tôi có một cái đề xuất là để được thì chúng ta nên tiếp tục mở rộng nghiên cứu giai đoạn 2 tại vùng đồng bằng sông Cửu Long. Đấy là một cái vấn đề rất thiết yếu mà Bộ Giao thông Việt Nam cũng như là bản thân chuyên gia tôi cảm thấy rất cần thiết. Để tôi xin rất là vui mừng và được cảm ơn các quý vị trong cái phỏng vấn này.
Thank you very much to those two for sending them in. We're coming to the end of the programme. There's a few more areas I'd like to touch on before we wrap things up. Paola, how important has it been to showcase the involvement of women in this project, especially those with a STEM background, and obviously hopefully inspire other women and girls to be involved in projects like these in the future?
I think that finding gender balance within the team was one of our priority, as you can tell from the presence of Ong and myself, but even our transport economist at TDSI was Miss Ha, and our main researcher, who I hope is here today, Xiao Lu, was the postdoctoral researcher who has helped with the development of the mathematical model. So it was really a key priority, and now it's a priority for funders as well to have well-balanced research teams. And in many funding applications nowadays, you have to make a statement about gender, about EDIs. But I think that our project went also one step further because in addition to have a balanced team, we were also looking at the impact of floods on women. So our survey and the impact assessment contain a full session that was really devoted to the impact on women and to gender differentiation in the flood impacts. In terms then of having an impact on future women, I really hope that more and more women will undertake a career in operational research, which is actually the name of our discipline, and in analytics, because it's fascinating, it's exciting, and every day you work on different projects. So I work on Vietnam on this project, but I work with the big companies here in the UK, with the NHS, with the NGOs in South Sudan on medical issues and healthcare. So it's really so varied and so fascinating that it's a pity not to see more women going for this kind of career.
I'm sure it's going to inspire many hearing about the work that's been done today. Phong, you also feel really strongly about mainstreaming gender. How do you go about advocating gender mainstreaming in academic research?
Yes, so I would like to add, as Paola already mentioned, our research, first of all, we also have a very strong gender expertise in the team, including myself, and also we involve other colleagues. I would like to say thanks to Ms. Phạm Thu Hiền, one of the most well-known Vietnamese gender expert in Vietnam, who also involved in the gender analysis with us after the survey. And we have very strong balanced team of the research in the UK and also in Vietnam. And as you know, that the UK have committed to a lot of money to development aid, and one of the objectives of the development aid in other developing countries is to reduce inequality, but also reduce gender inequality in this country. So this is one of the objectives of the top government policy. So I hope that all the researchers and in particular the global research funds also have their own gender equality statement guidance for all the researchers to improve gender mainstreaming into their research. So these are the very strong conditions for all the research in the UK to take gender seriously. As I described all the impacts earlier in the earlier part about the gender differentiated impacts on women and children, girls. So if you don't take gender seriously, then you cannot bring the benefits of your research to address the consequences of the disaster on the women, on the girls. So I think, as I mentioned, because the UK already have the guidance, so it's important to follow the guidance strictly. In the guidance, the government also has pointed out that you have to work at the outcome level, output level, indicators to monitor benefit for different groups of the society, and most importantly, they also emphasize the change of gender relation. Now, gender relation within the household is the hardest one to deal with. And for our researchers, normally it's a bit harder to understand. But we also have many partners in the countries. For example, in all Asian countries, we have NGOs who have been working intensively on gender issues with different tools that they use at the household level. So I really encourage the UK researchers for any research in developing country cooperate with the NGOs, with the gender expert in the country, so that they can address the gender intensively in their research. Now, in terms of the gender mainstreaming in the research, first of all, we need to include the gender into the topmost objective of the research. So, for example, in our research, we have models, the mathematical models. Ideally, our model objective should also have gender implication in that. And then you also develop, you have to have the budget for gender analysis, because without the analysis, you cannot understand the differences of different impacts on men and women, children, boys and girls. So this activity is really important to include in the activity, but also in the budget in your research. Another point you need to mention is when you develop the research indicators. So the gender indicator should be there. For example, if you say your research contribute to the improve in terms of incomes of the people, then you need to see what is the percentage of income for women and percentage of income for men. So those gender indicator, we also talk a lot about in our work in Asia and Africa. We talk a lot about the transformative gender indicator. It means that the activity that you work on, it changes the gender relation within the household. Now, this one is taking time, but I hope I have the opportunity to talk more about the policy advocacy of our research as well to emphasize that. So the indicator, the implementation, the evaluation of the research at the end, all the gender should be systematically mainstreamed in all different steps. That's the way to go in the future for all the researchers. Thank you.
Absolutely. Really important. And you also talked about the Global Challenges Research Fund as well. It's obviously been vital to this project, and it really provides that international outlook for projects like this one. Paola, we've had a question in about kind of that international outlook. Juliana has sent in a question. She said, do you plan on expanding and applying your projects to other parts of the world? She comes from South America, and they suffer in a lower level from flooding and mudslides. So is this is what has been taken from this research? Can it be applied to other regions in the world and maybe to other natural disasters?
Yes, certainly. In fact, that's really our aim. This project was a pilot and the starting point, but our next key priority, if we can secure more funding, would be to apply this to the Mekong Delta region, because there was a strong advocacy for this from our stakeholders. But certainly the framework that we have built is applicable to any region of the world and also to different kinds of disasters. So, for example, at the moment, I'm working with one of my PhD students on earthquake disasters. And the models need to be adapted because it's a different context. For example, rescue operations are different and the impacts are different. But again, you can collect the data and you can have participatory approaches to identify what are the main needs and the main objectives, depending on the region and the disaster. And then the mathematical model just follows up to give this evidence-based and scientific approach to use resources in the best possible way. But I would say without any doubt that this approach and this interdisciplinary framework is adaptable and usable everywhere in the world to deal with the disaster management problems.
And that touches on a question that we've been sent in from Bi Huang Yen. She said, do you have any projects, activities to scale up the research results? You've obviously spoken about it a bit there, but maybe addressing that and also bringing a close to the event about saying what maybe the next stage is that we could be really excited about and look forward to with this project.
Yeah, I would say this project has been really instrumental in creating all the connections that we have now in Southeast Asia. And the next step, in fact, is a project that we already started that involves 7 different universities in 5 countries in Southeast Asia, including Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Indonesia, in addition to Vietnam. And basically what we are trying to do with this project, that also involves the University of Lancaster and Southampton here in the UK, is to build analytics capacity in the countries. Because it is true that the UK can collaborate and can help developing countries by applying these methodologies. But I think that the most important help we can provide is by really building the capacity of applying these methodologies in-house. So the next stage is really to develop proposals in collaboration with academics and stakeholders in all these countries, to develop then mathematical models and techniques and the ability to develop and apply the techniques in Southeast Asia to address also different problems, not only disaster management problems, but other key challenges related, for example, to the resilience of infrastructure development, smart city and food security. So some of the most pressing global challenges are really prone and suitable to apply this kind of methodologies. So our next step is definitely going in that direction and broaden the horizon to apply these techniques in other contexts.
Yeah, really positive outlook and a look to the future, probably a good place to end as well. And we've also had a final comment in from Penelope saying many congratulations to the team led by Professor Scaparra. So a great note to end on. It's been great to have you on, Paola, Fong and Chin. Many thanks as well to everyone who sent in their testimonials, and a big thank you to you at home watching and sending in all your amazing questions for our panel. Now, you can keep the conversation going and engaging in the work Paola and her team are up to by following the project at GCRF_Osiris on Twitter or GCRF.Osiris on Facebook. Before we go, we got another short video showcasing the projects which started it all. We heard a little bit earlier on about the Port of Dover and also the Eurostar work that Paola had been working on. So we'll be playing those shortly. But that's all from me here. We hope you've enjoyed this fascinating discussion and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Long queues, traffic jams and lengthy delays. It's every commuter and haulier's worst nightmare, and solving these problems pose plenty of their own headaches. As well as Vietnam, Professor Scaparra and her team have worked on real-world projects using analytics for infrastructure and transport planning here in the UK, namely along 2 of Kent's major travel arteries to the continent, the Port of Dover and Eurostar.
We take the real-world system and we try and represent it in a virtual system. So we can kind of come up with a traffic profile, if you will, and use that to actually try and predict when our queue is going to be critical and when do they need to take action to try and alleviate that.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in a rail network. It's a very, very complicated operation running a rail network, and there's an awful lot of factors that are kind of outside of the control of Eurostar as well. What we found was that we could model the passenger queues in the stations very well. You know, we could anticipate when queues were going to form based on kind of planned timetables and stuff like that. We all agreed upon eventually a kind of new layout arrangement for the Paris terminal check-in area. Had a notable kind of increase in throughput of passengers. It was about 20% more efficient at getting passengers through. So it was a pretty significant improvement.
The collaboration with the Port of Dover focused too on improving congestion, while also increasing footfall through Britain's gateway to Europe.
You can hit basically play and you can run a whole year's or a whole month's or whatever, a whole week's worth of passengers or vehicles going through your system, and you can kind of see where are these queues building up. And that was the key thing. And then with this virtual environment, it runs very quickly, and then you can make little changes. So you're like, what if I change this little part of the system? What if I change that? What if I add this? What if I take away that?
Two significant and successful projects, the results of which has not only improved the journeys of those using and profiting from these major transport networks. The knowledge developed by Professor Scaparra and her team will directly inform ongoing projects that the team is running in Southeast Asia, allowing countries to tackle their infrastructure issues head on.
What I do think is it actually does drive innovations in the research itself. So figuring out what are the real world problems that companies have or organizations have, you can then bring that back into the research realm and then try and generalize it to other situations.
Yeah, as much as the kind of end product gives you this kind of useful tool, really a lot of the benefit of the project comes from just the process of doing it and the process of working with the stakeholders to develop these models.